Hi there. Welcome to my yard, which could just as easily be your yard. In the 5 programs of this series, we're going to show you how to give this rather depressing space a water-wise makeover, to give it a new look and new life, and at the same time, find out how to use less water. This yard has gone through all those growing pains that most people's yards go through. In the beginning, there was a sand pile and a play yard for the kids when they were small, a little area where we had the barbecue, a vegetable garden of sorts, a patch of grass that was mostly weeds, and some trees that a neighbor had left over when he did his landscaping. You could say my yard sort of started out without any real plan, and then kept going the same way. The need for landscaping which conserves water is increasingly important. We don't have any control over climate and the amount of natural moisture that we get. But by reducing the amount of water we use outdoors, we can ensure that demand doesn't exceed supply, and we can save money on our water bill at the same time. I've been referring to it as sort of a midlife crisis, but more accurately, I suppose you could say that in the past 20 years, we haven't spent a lot of effort on it, and it's time we did. But now we have a different lifestyle, and we figure it's time to do something with the yard, to reflect the way our life is now and the way we expect it will be in the future. What we're looking for is sort of an outdoor living area, where we can entertain or just relax and take it easy, and also spend some time puttering, growing a few vegetables and flowers, but without a lot of fuss and effort. And we want to make most of the natural moisture we do get in this part of the country and make sure the water we're using isn't being wasted. That's what got us interested in xeriscaping in the first place. Wise water use for your garden and outdoor living areas. The name xeros comes from the Greek word meaning dry, and it made a lot of sense to us, considering the weather cycles that a lot of parts of the country are going through. Ample moisture alternating with periods of drought in many areas. The first question was, how to get started? And the answer was pretty simple. Figure out what you want to do with the space. Look at the site, consider the functions, look at where movement and various activities will have to take place. So we made a list of all the different things we wanted to use our yard for and the various aspects that we wanted to see in it. Enough deck space for small dinner parties, trees and plants to attract birds and butterflies, a place for nieces and nephews and grandchildren to play when they come to visit, a quiet spot to sit and read and enjoy the flowers, the sound of water splashing in a fountain, a sheltered place to barbecue, space enough to grow a few vegetables and berries. That was our wish list. That was where we started. Then I measured the lot and the house. I could have used a deed map instead, but I didn't have it handy. Then I transferred those measurements to graph paper so I'd have a scale drawing to work from. By laying tracing paper over it, I could try different designs and combinations. It's usually a good thing to look at your entire property, front and back, as one piece when you're planning a makeover. In our case, however, we realized our budget wasn't going to stretch that far, so we decided to do the backyard first and carry on with the front and side yards next year. Ask yourself some questions and look at your options. How much can you afford to spend? Are you going to do the whole yard at once or in stages? Are you going to do the work yourself or hire someone to do it for you? Are there problem areas, drainage difficulties? Are you patient enough to wait for the plants to fill out, or do you want to put in more plants than you need right now to cover up the bare soil for the time being? We decided that by doing some of the work ourselves, we could save enough money to hire professionals to do some of the stuff we don't feel comfortable with. No matter where you live, you're bound to have a variety of expert sources of information available to help guide you through the basics of redoing your yard. We've got a handy workbook that's been developed to go along with our step-by-step procedures on It's Your Yard. I'll tell you later how you can order a copy. But there are also lots of how-to books at your library or through various government departments, community programs, or workshops offered by commercial firms. Any of those could give you the help you need to get started remaking your yard by using water-wise principles. You could check your yellow pages or talk to the personnel at commercial nurseries or greenhouses. Some city greenhouses or parks departments may have a call-in service you can contact for advice. Asking friends or neighbors for their recommendations can be helpful too. Or you could get in touch with the horticulturalists at some colleges and universities, landscape designers or landscape architects, various federal government agencies, or provincial or state departments of agriculture. To make sure the advice we're giving in this series is both practical and accurate, we're working with a number of expert sources, and you're going to be meeting these folks as the show progresses. I'll be back in just a moment with one of those experts who's going to show us what to do next for our makeover.
To maximize your water savings, you may find it beneficial to modify the shape of the land, causing water to flow to areas where it can do the most good.
I'm here in Winnipeg today, and I'm going to be talking to one of the chief advisors on our makeover project. His name is Charlie Thompson, and he's head of the Landscape Architecture Department at the University of Manitoba. Charlie?
Come on in.
Good morning, good morning.
Good morning, Dale. How are you?
Just fine, thanks for having me here.
Good. Glad that you could stop by.
One very important question, Charlie. Just how important is it for people to be doing these makeover projects in their yards in order to protect and conserve our water resources?
Very important. Our emphasis in our design, the students that we try to teach, we try to instruct in water conservation. That's one of the key things. The whole thing is reducing our need for resources, additional resources, energy, fertilizer, all these things, the amount of time and effort we put into maintaining a landscape. But water is by far the most important, factor that we try to deal with.
Now, I understand you've been doing some of this work yourself.
Yeah. Try to practice what we preach. And so my own home landscape is a bit of an experiment. It's a bit of a demonstration place on how you can actually do some of these things, water conservation.
What are the chances of seeing some of that work in your own backyard?
Oh, I'd love to show it to you. Come
Lead
on.
the way, please.
Okay.
You've got a beautiful yard, Charlie. It's absolutely gorgeous. And how did you go about coming up with the master plan for all this?
Well, first thing we did is we began to think about the landscape as a series of zones. And those zones could be defined spatially, of course, but they'd also be defined by the amount of time and effort and water that we would have to put into it, the amount of maintenance that each of these zones would require. The wet area here, the cattails and all the water-loving plants, this is where our sump water is collected from the basement of the house. It dumps in here every day, and so we needed some place to store that excess water.
Right here.
We've got a higher topography, and that's a dry zone. That's the aspen woodlot, which is a characteristic plant community on this part of the region, or in this part of the region. We've got in the north side of the house is a cool, dark, shady area with a lot of snow in the wintertime, and that's the moist, sort of a simulated boreal forest with the tamarack and the birch, white birch, and there is a balsam fir in there, and so they're the sort of shade-loving, cool soils, that type of environment. But here in the full sunlight, all during the day, summer and winter, very hot and dry area, this is where we planted the grasslands as well as the aspen plant communities. And it works out very well for us. We have the area that we put a lot of time and energy and water into, and that's the herbs and the vegetable area. And this part of the landscape we never touch with irrigated water.
So that goes right back to the basics of xeriscaping then. You group your plants into zones where they can make the best use of available water.
That's right. And the natural water that's flowing from the sky. Yep.
Right. Now, dealing with the experts, if I wanted to get somebody to do a more detailed master plan for me, who would I get in touch with?
Well, there's a number of places that you can get advice from. One, if you wanted to do it on your own, that's go to a library and probably sift through a number of books and reference material. Or there's actual professionals that would be working on landscapes such as this. Landscape architects are one source of information where you can go and hire a landscape architect to actually come up with a design for your particular landscape. They would be professionally trained. They would be a member of a professional association. They would also, in some provinces and in most of the states, would have to have a license to be called a landscape architect. There's other places, nurseries, nurserymen. They're usually professionally trained, meaning they've had a degree in horticulture or plant science. They've had long experience. They run their own nursery. They've got a lot of practical experience. That's another source that you can ask for information on. Generally, they have designers as part of their staff that can do plans for you and give you some ideas. Nursery or landscape contractors are another place that you can get information from. They've had experience, perhaps they're technically sound in certain areas, as putting in irrigation systems or constructing paved areas or decks. And sometimes they do their own design as well as the construction. So I think there's a number of sources. The key thing you'd want to do is to see out in the general neighborhood what landscapes you like, what you like about them, and ask questions. Who did it? Who designed it? To build your own little reference.
Your advice, Charlie. What should I be doing myself, and what should I be having the experts do for me?
Good question, because a lot of homeowners will get in way over their heads and have to have someone come in later on and bail them out. I think you have to know your own limitations, both in terms of your expertise, but also budget. And you'd want to identify those projects or those pieces of your design that are going to require some expertise, such as a nurseryman to come in and plant maybe the largest trees, because that way you can get a guarantee that they're going to survive over a number of years, and they will be replaced if they don't survive. Okay, that's one thing. Another thing may be the irrigation system. Perhaps there's a special wiring technique that has to be used to wire it to your own electrical system, or the plumbing, the connections up to your water system. Those things you'd want to make sure operate perfectly. And if they don't operate, you want to be able to call someone in to correct it and not have to spend the hours to try to trace out what's the difficulty.
Exactly. So it's a matter then of applying a good dose of common sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, after talking to you today, Charlie, I feel pretty confident in being able to handle most of the planting myself. I can certainly do the mulching. I can give a hand with the deck, maybe the irrigation system, but the rest of it I'm going to leave up to the experts. I want to thank you for your time and the information and the tour. This has been fascinating.
Well, I'm happy to be of help to you, and good luck with your work.
Thank you. The plans we talked about today are going to be best suited for me and my family. They may not work for you. Remember, when xeriscaping, it's what works best for you.
It's possible to pay for your conservation improvements with savings derived from lower water bills, fewer purchases of chemicals, and lower maintenance costs.
We've been talking about xeriscaping. That's low water use gardening. And if you'll remember, one of the reasons we decided to redo our yard was water conservation. It makes ecological sense, and it certainly saves money. But I'm not sure whether or not what I've done so far in my yard makeover has anything at all to do with xeriscaping or water conservation. So I'm here to ask that question of one of our gardening experts. Sarah Williams is a horticultural specialist at the Extension Division of the University of Saskatchewan. Sarah, you have got a beautiful yard here.
Thank you very much.
Now, can you tell me, please, is anything that I have done so far in preparing to redo my yard going to save me water later on?
Well, I think you've certainly done your homework. You've learned a lot about plants. You've learned which ones take a lot of water, which ones take moderate water, and which ones take just a little bit of water or hardly any water at all once they're established. And then if you go the next step, planning and design, and group plants according to their water needs, I think that's the first step in the principles of xeriscape.
That's one of the first things I've read, no matter what I come across as far as xeriscaping is concerned, the importance of grouping high water users away from low water users so that you can conserve that all-important moisture.
Right, and that's sort of what I've done here. I mean, you're dealing with 5 acres here, and this looks like an awful lot, but this is my high water use area, and considering 5 acres, it's really a very small percentage.
It is that.
And then as you go further out, the plants have moderate water use, and then further out from there, they're really quite drought tolerant.
So you should have, I guess, on the outer perimeter, those plants that can get by on just natural rainfall and snow.
Right.
And still on the topic of watering, how do you water the plants you've got here?
I'm a hose dragger, so I drag a hose around, and when I first put plants in, I really water them well, and by that I mean you water less frequently, but when you do water, you water deeply.
Really soak them.
So it goes into the root ball and then into the soil below.
That brings me to another question I was going to ask you. When you first put them in the ground, you really soak them. You have to.
Yeah, you have to water into the root ball and into the soil below, so you encourage really deep rooting.
Okay, so really then there are some basic rules to follow when it comes to proper watering or irrigation or whatever you want to call it, but there is still some common sense that has to prevail.
Right. So if it's a very hot, windy, dry day, you have to check it a little bit more often. If you've had rain for 4 weeks,
then
you're home free.
Slack off.
Right.
Well, a little bit anyway. Now, if we can move on to our next step, the next questions on soil improvement.
Okay.
Soil improvement, that's the third in the 7 principles of xeriscaping. Now, I know it means adding organic material to the soil, but why do we do it?
We do it for two different reasons. One, to improve the ability of the soil to hold water, and the other to improve the ability of the soil to hold nutrients or fertilizer once you put it on there, so it just doesn't get leached below.
And what do you recommend adding?
Well, it depends on your soil. This is very sandy soil, as you can see. So what I'm going to add is a lot of peat moss to it. Now, you could be adding compost, or you could be adding well-aged manure. As long as you can't tell what the cow had for breakfast, you can assume that it's aged.
And the key is to get it down towards the root level area of the plants.
The key is to incorporate it thoroughly so you don't have layers. If you have a layer of poor soil, then a layer of really, high organic matter soil, you're going to find that there's not as good root penetration and not as good water penetration.
Okay.
So the key is to incorporate it thoroughly and not to have any layers once you've added it.
Okay. Now, one thing we don't want to get confused with, and that's mulching and soil improvement. Mulching is the next of our 7 principles, but in one, will you explain the difference?
Well, the difference is that soil improvement, you're adding organic matter into the soil. Mulching, it stays on top. And
Two entirely different things.
For 2 entirely different reasons.
Can we move on to mulching?
We certainly can.
Thank you, Sarah.
We'll go over here. Mulch is a 4-inch layer of organic material that's placed right on the soil surface and in between the plants. And it has 2 functions. The first one is to prevent weed growth, so that weeds that land on the soil surface, weed seeds won't germinate. The second is to conserve water. In this case, we've used wood chips, but you could also use grass clippings, you could use flax chives, any organic material that's
So say the clippings
available.
off your lawn, you can even use that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and I notice it comes right up to the base of the plants. Again, that's to keep weeds down and...
Conserve water.
Right.
There's a general perception that you can use gravel or crushed rock or that sort of thing, but all that does is collect and hold heat, so it really creates a very hot, dry environment for your plants, and it's really not that good.
Now, after mulches, we have the 5th principle of xeriscaping, and that's limited lawn use. Can you tell us something about that?
I sure can. This is the limited lawn. Lawns really take up an enormous amount of water, and in a traditional landscape they have the largest space in the yard. This is a rather limited lawn. It's watered. It's nice to go barefoot in.
It's enough to make do with what you really want it for. If you want to play croquet, or like you said, just go barefoot, you've got some lawn.
The 7th and final principle of xeriscaping is appropriate maintenance. So it doesn't mean no maintenance, but it certainly is lower maintenance. And your whole emphasis is on water conservation. So you want to make sure your mulch layer is maintained so guys like this don't come through, and to conserve water. And the other thing you want to make sure about is your automated watering system, if you have one, that the timers are working, so you have deep but less frequent watering. The emitters are working, that you're not on non-target areas.
So my basic plans then are right on track.
I think they are. It's a perception thing where people think that xeriscaping is all gravel and skulls and dry land, but it's beautiful, it's lush, it's colorful, it's green, but you're conserving water.
Sarah, I want to thank you very much for all your help.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Water-saving gardening is based on working with nature. Even in the driest parts of the country, we generally get some natural moisture in the form of rain, snowfall, mist, or fog. Make the most of it.
Well, that's how we got started on the first steps to a water-wise makeover for our yard, planning and design. Start by deciding what it is you want to use your yard for. Assess what's already there, what you want to keep, and what you want to change. Look at the site, function, and patterns of movement. Measure your space. Make a map. Use tracing paper or photocopies so you can try a variety of ideas. Show where the sun hits, which way the prevailing winds blow, and where any runoff or grade problems might exist. Sketch in your traffic patterns and things that aren't going to move, like a garage and perhaps a favorite tree. Gather all the ideas you can and think about how you might use them. Decide if you really need a patch of lawn, how big it should be, what shape it should be, where it should be, and should it be at all. Many communities are encouraging homeowners to reverse the present 80-to-20 ratio of lawn to non-lawn. Sketch in the way you'd group your plants, high water users together, close to the house in a sheltered spot, and low water users farther out. Then you can turn your sketch into an actual plan to follow as you go forward, or take it to a professional to turn into a plan for you. Remember, your plan can be adjusted whenever it needs to be. Today's points are all covered in the workbook that's been created to go along with It's Your Yard. If you'd like your own copy, I'll tell you how to get it in just a few minutes. Water-wise gardens can be beautiful, colorful, practical, and economical. And more people every day are finding out about xeriscaping and its many benefits. Some people xeriscape because they hate mowing the lawn or resent paying big water bills. Some are motivated out of a concern for our environment, the conservation of a natural resource, water. We're doing it because it fits our lifestyle. Whatever your reasons, I suggest you only xeriscape to the degree with which you are comfortable. Don't let it become an unnatural principle. In our next session of It's Your Yard, we'll be looking at improving the soil, getting it ready for planting, and effective irrigation. I hope you'll join us then. I'm Dale Simmons, and It's Your Yard. If you would like to order your copy of the It's Your Yard workbook and accompanying video, please call 1-800-663-1653.